Hey guys! So this is our last lecture of the semester, and we're going to be talking about the end of Nevada. Um, so there's like stuff, I guess, I want to address about this book, and a lot more responses to the discussions since last week that I can kind of talk about. So that's cool. Um, so from what I'm reading and people's like reception of this book, is it continues to be somewhat divisive. And I guess like one thing I kind of want to address is that this book was kind of controversial, like among trans authors too, as often happens in, I guess like in that community. And I think the reason for that is because it's so rare for books authored by trans people to get like a big like following and even to be published, that there are a lot of expectations put on books like that. So um, if even if you think back to like Langston Hughes, right, what he was writing about in The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, he basically is saying like he's responding to this idea that there were a lot of like black authors at the time who felt that depicting black life in America as anything other than like exemplary would be a stain on the entire black community and would make like white people think badly of them and would set them back. And I think in the same vein, at this point in time, like we still don't have a lot of like really popular books by trans authors, so there are a lot of expectations. And I think that's actually part of what I really like about this book, is it doesn't claim to be like the trans novel, or like this is the trans experience, right? It's like just one girl's experience. Like, she comes from a very specific place, she lives in a very specific city, and she's had these specific experiences that like come from when she grew up and all this stuff. And like lots of trans people don't necessarily relate to this book, right? Like that's okay. Like it doesn't have to be speaking for the whole community. And that's really why there's like such an argument for diversity in literature, right? Because if you are only reading one book by one trans author, you might assume that that's like the trans experience. So I would obviously like encourage you to read books by other trans authors as well. And like I told you, like this press, Topside Press, everyone they publish is trans, so you can read a lot of other books by trans people if you check out more stuff from this press. Instar Books is another wonderful press that publishes a lot of trans authors, also like run by one of my best friends, so that's my plug for that. But they really do publish good stuff. So yeah, just addressing that. Let's see. So this time we are going to be talking about the second half of the book, which is about James, and which all takes place like once Maria has gotten to Nevada. And I think it's interesting that we don't actually really get a bunch of her like road trip in this book, right? Like she's in New York and then she's in Nevada, and she's not in California. She's just in Nevada. She's not in Las Vegas. She's in Reno. So I don't know, kind of interesting. So the James section starts on page, let's see, 137, I believe. Yeah. And the first sentence of it is, Star City, Nevada is fucking bullshit. So we see that right from the get-go, James has the exact same attitude toward his hometown as Maria does. And if we want to think about this as kind of like a quintessentially American or quintessentially anti-American novel even, that's like a central tenet of what it means to be American, right? Like we do live in a country with like just zillions of like random towns that you can grow up in that you might hate. New Orleans is not really, I mean, you might hate growing up here, but it's definitely not really like in the same category of like some shithole town where nothing ever happens. But that is a very like common experience in America. And so both of them are having that, and I think that's kind of like a cool parallel. And the depiction of Star City is, I think, meant to be sort of a joke about America. Okay, so on page 138, James says, there's a truck stop out toward Route 80 and a couple stores that aren't Walmart. A shitty little florist, a shitty kind of big garage. But mostly since Walmart sells everything every other shitty little store would sell anyway, this town is like, there is a mountain with a Walmart on it. So, if you imagine this town, it's just a mountain with Walmart on it. And I think that's a really powerful symbol of like America in 2013. It's a powerful American symbol, right? Because obviously, like, we live in a time where there are a lot of like huge corporations that are kind of like part of the fabric of like American identity at this point, and not really in a charming way, right? Like, I don't think anybody's ever had like a nostalgic feelings about a Walmart. It's like this giant corporation that's like known for abusing its workers and like paying, these low wages while making like ridiculous profits that they can easily afford to pay their workers a living salary, and like, they sell everything. They're environmentally destructive. There's really not a lot of like good things to say about Walmart other than that like it's affordable, but it's not really a morally defensible operation. It's all about profit. And as we know, America is a country where profit comes before everything. A lot of times. I mean, I think that, especially today, like if you look at, we literally hired the guy, or we elected the guy from The Apprentice to be our president because he's a businessman, right? Like, Americans literally think that our country can be run by a business, or like a business. And we're seeing a lot of rhetoric now, like in the time of COVID-19, about how like the economy should reopen because it's more important for the economy to survive than for people to survive, which is horrifying, right? So like we are really seeing like the darkest sides of capitalism, I think, right now, of like just this profit-based society where, people's lives are being considered less important than the economy. I don't really know how else to say that. So yeah, dark. And then the fact that it's on a mountain is also important, right? Because America has traditionally been seen as this sort of like land of dreams, right? Like you can achieve your dreams in America. If you're an immigrant, like America is definitely a place that you can go to like make money. And it's, it's got this kind of, this old image of America as a place that you can like reach the top and make your life better. So the mountain could kind of symbolize that, right? This like climbing to the top of America and like, achieving the American dream or something. And then like when you get to the top, all there is a Walmart. So symbolic and also like funny. So that's Star City. So much like Maria, James has a lot of anxieties about sex and his body, and this is something that kind of we see like throughout his section. And I think something interesting to note is that his girlfriend is like a really cool chick. Like she sounds to me like someone who would probably be reasonably supportive if James told her that he was trans, or even just like brought up the fact that he was thinking about this stuff with her. So this book really like refuses to play into like the I think like the narrative of like, oh, like you're stuck in this relationship with someone who like won't understand you and that's why you like can't come out, right? Like I think that James is really like not held back by Steph. I think he's held back by himself, and I think that we're really asked to interrogate like what James would need to do in order to become comfortable with who he is, and like just to ask these questions and to like consider coming out, and just think through like what he wants and like who he is. Yeah. So, which is true of Maria's relationship with Steph too, right? Like Steph is like a pretty good girlfriend. I know some of you guys commented about how like heartless it was of Steph to cheat on Maria, but Maria already had slept with Kieran while they were together, and I think part of this book is kind of, I mean, it's about these queer relationships, right? And like generally it's more common to be open or like poly within the queer community, and Maria doesn't seem super upset by the fact that Steph cheated on her. Also, Steph didn't cheat on her. Steph lied about cheating on her, so that's not even like a real thing. So, I mean, I think it's sort of like, I guess, coming from like a heteronormative standpoint, like the cheating seems more horrible than I think either Maria or Steph would have seen it to be. Like even if, I don't know, even if she had actually cheated, because again, like they have this history of like Maria having slept with Kieran in the relationship. So it seems to me like between the two of them, it would be more something to like talk through and not something to like freak out about and like end the relationship. But Maria's obviously like looking for a way out anyway, and Steph can't, you know, she wants Maria to communicate with her. She wants her to be like, you know, like sharing how she feels. She wants her to stop faking her orgasms, but like ultimately Maria won't talk to Steph. So again, like that's not Steph's fault. That's Maria's fault within that relationship. Okay, so let's see. Oh, one other really important thing I wanted to mention about this book that I completely forgot last time, but many of you mentioned the style of it as being like conversational, and you felt like you were in Maria's head or James's head or Steph's head, depending whose chapter you're in. And then it made it really like easy to read, which I'm glad. I think it's good to have something easy at the end of this semester, the end of any semester really, but this one has really just been. So the style this is written in is called Stream of Consciousness, and Stream of Consciousness is actually a literary technique developed by modernists, and it's just a literary style in which a character's thoughts, feelings, and reactions are depicted in a continuous flow, uninterrupted by objective description or conventional dialogue. So if you've ever had to read what's it called, The Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield, classic high school book, that's like a standard like stream of consciousness book that a lot of people are familiar with, and it does make the reading experience more fun, especially if you're reading like a stream of consciousness book that was published in like a decade that you were alive, so they kind of talk the way you talk and like it's relatable and understandable. So in this book we are just like in Maria's head, like we're like almost trapped in her thoughts, and I think that's a very intentional choice on the part of Imogen Binnie, because by trapping us in Maria's thoughts, we experience what it would be like to kind of live with this like obsessive, like cyclical thinking kind of that she does, and this sort of inability to, I mean, I think part of this book, right, is about like, you know, the inability to escape yourself. Like no matter what you do, you're always you. And Maria is trying to become better, but is finding it difficult because she can't quite get in touch with like her own emotions. She can't really be vulnerable with other people. But she's trying, so that's really all you can do. Another concept that I think is important to address that's in this section is this idea of autogynephilia. And so on page 153, James talks a little bit about it, and he says, there aren't autogynephile support groups either, because autogynephiles are a kind of transsexual. Sort of. Fake transsexuals, ugly transsexuals, men who decide to become women even though they're nothing like women. James has looked it up. Kenneth Zucker, J. Michael Bailey, it's science. And so I think this is a really important moment, because if you still look this up now, you know, the guy who thought of it is still alive, it's still kind of like considered science. So autogynephilia is basically this idea that was coined, or this term that was coined by a sexologist named Ray Blanchard in the 80s and 90s. He is a cis dude who has decided that he's an expert on trans people somehow. And in his idea, there are transsexual people who like, so like if you're like assigned male at birth and you're attracted to men, in his idea, you would be like a more like real transgender person, because once you transitioned, you'd be straight. Okay, so if you're assigned male at birth and you are into women, and then you transition, that means you're no longer straight, and so he sees that as like aberrant. So I guess something really important to keep in mind is that like gender and sexuality are not the same, right? Like your gender identity and who you're like sexually attracted to aren't necessarily linked, you know, they don't have to be the same. But in Blanchard's view, being trans is only valid, or is more valid, when your transition makes you heterosexual. So that's problematic, and it's very controversial. And he basically says that trans women who are autogynephiles, which is his term, are so attracted to women that not only do they want to sleep with women, but they also want to become women. So they want to become the object of their attraction, which is, I mean, I don't know. It's honestly like hard for me to even like begin to address the ways in which that's like just fucked up and like not true, you know. But you know, it's still a concept that's out there, that you can still read about. Most trans people who study this stuff don't think it's real, but you know, unfortunately, this cis dude got to like, I don't know, got to decide. And the other thing that's sort of problematic about the term autogynephilia, is that it decides whose transness is more valid and real. And an example of that would be the movie The Silence of the Lambs, if you've ever seen that. So within that movie, which is alluded to in this book as well, because it's kind of like a big like cultural, I don't know, it was really famous, and it deals with trans people, or a trans person. So in Silence of the Lambs, the murderer, Buffalo Bill, I'm going to use they pronouns for Buffalo Bill because the movie makes it pretty clear that they don't see themselves as a man, but they do use he pronouns throughout that movie. Anyway, so Buffalo Bill is a murderer who traps women in their basement and takes their skin off and then wears the women's skin. And the idea of this is that Buffalo Bill is evil because they are trans. And at one point, Hannibal says that Buffalo Bill is not really a trans woman because Buffalo Bill is attracted to women, and that means that they are like psychotic and sick, as opposed to trans, or as opposed to validly trans. So this book is engaging with like these kind of problematic ideas that James, as someone who doesn't really know any other trans people, who doesn't have access to that kind of information in his like daily life, this is like the stuff that James finds on the internet when he's like searching, you know, like for who or like what kind of a person he is, right? Because he knows that he's attracted to women, so like he thinks that maybe his transness is less real or valid. And Maria addresses that in their like car discussion and basically says, well, like that's bullshit. Don't listen to that. I'm sorry that like you had to, you know, read all that shit. But it's not, you know, it's not real, basically. Okay, so let's see. So Star City, Nevada is like where Maria ends up on her quest toward the West, toward freedom, toward like the American dream of like authenticity and like finding yourself. She's on her way to Reno, but she stops in Star City and believes that she has possibly found like a purpose here, because when she sees James, the first thing she thinks is, this is on page 162, she says, as soon as Maria Griffiths sees James Hansen in the Star City, Nevada Walmart, she's like, that kid is trans and he doesn't even know it yet. It's a really important moment in the story, because this is where Maria decides that like she is gonna like have a quest, you know, she like decides this is her purpose. So we talked a little bit last time about like the idea of epiphanies, and so I think for her, she's hoping that she can give James an epiphany of some sort, give him like this realization of who his true self is, and like, you know, what kind of authenticity like he can seek. And on page 168, I really like how they're kind of talking about country music, because Maria's like looking for this album. So this is the bottom. They're talking about security, and she says, I don't think they could take you. She says, you look like a total bruiser. Yeah, he says, totally. I'm a regular old Brad Paisley. Which one is Brad Paisley? You know, he says, I don't highlight my hair and I've still got a pair. Maria's eyes light up and she quotes from this dumb country song, my eyebrows ain't plucked and there's a gun in my truck. So I really like this exchange because it kind of highlights the way in which like strict gender roles and strict gender norms are still very much a part of like certain subsets of American culture. And country music, I think, is I think we can all agree that country music is pretty like quintessentially American. It's like a very American form. Like if you know, it's patriotic and like it talks about America all the time. And so within country music, within this like quintessentially American form, we have these lyrics like, you know, I don't highlight my hair and I've still got a pair, which implies that if a man were to care about his appearance, he would be castrated, right? Or something like, my eyebrows ain't plucked and I got a gun in my truck, which implies, again, that men should not care about their appearances, and also that, you know, the ability to inflict violence at any time and death is masculine. Guns are also like a classic phallic symbol, sort of symbol of masculinity in literature. Okay, so let's see what else. On page 176, again, these ideas of epiphanies, like what do we realize? How do we come to be our true selves? Maria's talking about this moment of enlightenment, and she's talking about people she knows who transitioned long before she did, and she says they're not fuck-ups. This is on page 175 it starts, but they're not like Buddhas either. She's thought of them as Buddhas in her life, and then been disappointed when they've explained that their enlightenment consists of the same platitudes that every enlightenment consists of. Fuck what people think, and I don't know, man, and there is no center at the center of things. It's like, cool, but then how do you repair the damage that a fucking lifetime of not giving a fuck about your life did to you? I think this is a really important passage because, as we talked about last time, like the road novel is a quest for a moment of authenticity, and a moment where you can say, aha, I have found myself, right? Like I figured it out. I had this realization. I had this epiphany. And Maria is showing here how, like, okay, sure, you have an epiphany, like you realize something, but then what? Like there's an after that epiphany. And again, like fiction is maybe the only place where we get this like perfect epiphany. Like real life doesn't really provide that, which I think is how the book ends as well. Another big theme I think that we see throughout this book, and this section in particular, is this idea of defense mechanisms. So like, okay, this is 194 to 195. I'll just read this whole chunk. She says, if there's one thing a lifetime of Stockholm Syndrome with hegemony gives you, that's just structures of power, it's a thorough understanding of cultural tropes about trans women. It came from the older practice of telling everybody who thought they might be trans that they must be absolutely certain that they were trans before they even considered buying some clothes or started a testosterone blocker. It's the old narrative, the Johns Hopkins in the 70s narrative. The only people who are really trans are the people who knew explicitly from a young age, are pretty without hormones, and can't survive without transitioning. Trans women on the internet looked around and were like, well, maybe surviving for the first part of your life in the role of a cis dude is an adaptive strategy. Maybe convincing yourself that you could never transition is a defense mechanism that enabled you to survive high school, family, work. But like most defense mechanisms, it wasn't conscious, and like most defense mechanisms, it became a pattern you weren't aware of, and then, like most defense mechanisms, at some point, it stopped making your life easier and started making your life harder. And so both James and Maria are struggling in this book with their defense mechanisms, which seem to be making their lives harder. Maria is struggling with the defense mechanism in which she cannot talk to other people truly, like, from a vulnerable place, and cannot really, like, feel connected to her emotions. James is struggling with the defense mechanism where he basically is convincing himself that he is not trans. So this adaptive strategy of living in the role of a cis dude that is mentioned here. And I think that's really important, right? Like, I like that this book is about sort of coming to like a more authentic psychological truth where you can just like be yourself. And like a really important part of being yourself is like being in touch with your emotions and being able to feel things and being able to like connect on a genuine level with other people. And for both James and Maria, they feel really like isolated and really alienated from the people around them, even the people who love them and who they probably can trust, you know? So yeah, I think that's important. Let's see. So like he doesn't know how to talk to Nicole. He wonders about it. This is on page 226. He says, it feels like one leads to the other. Like, if he were to say, I don't want to watch a stupid Drew Carey movie, Nicole would be like, okay, what do you want to watch? And he'd be honest and be like, Paris is Burning, or Hedwig and the Angry Inch, or Trans America, or some other movie about transgender people that he can barely even admit to himself that he wants to watch. And then if he was honest about what movie he wanted to watch when Nicole comes over, the whole castle would tumble down, and it would lead to being honest about what kind of clothes he wants and what kind of body he'd want to have so he could look okay in those clothes, and then questions about what kind of sex he wants to have, which he doesn't even know how to answer. And that was when it just like sank in. That all the shit Maria had been talking about the whole time was exactly all of his own shit. Like different specifics, kind of. So this is sort of a moment of epiphany for James, but he doesn't end up doing anything with it. And I think that's what the book leaves us with. So the ending is disappointing. This ending it's an anticlimax. An anticlimax is just a conclusion that is unsatisfying because it doesn't meet the expectations the narrative has been building toward. Basically this feeling of disappointment. So I think obviously like most of us read this book and like wanted Maria to come to a realization, right? We wanted James to be like, you know what, like fuck it, I'm gonna tell Nicole, I'm gonna like live authentically, I'm gonna be myself. But instead, it ends with him just deciding this is stupid. So on page 242, he does a whole lap around the casino, which takes a while because it's fucking huge, but there's nothing to hide behind anywhere unless he wants to either climb that mutilated mountain or try to figure out a way around it. He's like, God damn it, this is fucking stupid. What am I doing in Reno with this stranger who doesn't give a fuck about me? He flips out pretty hard for a second, and then without even really thinking about it, he wanders over to the downtown shuttle, and people are getting on, so he lines up and gets on too. Nicole comes and picks him up in a couple of hours. He lies and doesn't mention Maria or heroin or anything. He says he bumped into Mark this morning and rode into Reno with him, then lost track of time. Mark isn't answering his text, James says. I don't know. Nicole drives him past the gas station where he and Maria pulled over so he could smoke out. The sun's on its way down, but it's not really dark out or anything, and he's thinking about whether they could pull over at the truck stop outside Star City where they went to on their first date. He wonders whether the yellow night and nostalgia can turn his body inconsequential enough to get hard. He wonders whether there's enough room in the back seat of Nicole's car for her to give him head. So the last part of this book sees James returning to a nostalgia for when he first met Nicole. So instead of like looking to the future and deciding like, okay, I'm going to try and like live authentically, I'm going to try and like make this decision, he sort of just slides back into his old life, which is what usually happens, right? Like if this book is real, like meant to mirror real life, like, yeah, I think that makes sense. You know, I wouldn't expect James to just like meet this random like trans girl who comes to Walmart and like change his whole life around immediately because of some stuff she says to him in the car. So I think a big part of this book is about how like epiphany isn't enough. Like a moment of clarity is just one moment. And then it's on us to do the work that comes after the moment of clarity. Like just because you realize something doesn't mean you're going to fix it. Okay, so that's it for Nevada. I hope you guys like that book, or, you know, at least got something out of it. So I just want to talk real quick about the exam. So as you guys know, if you were in my Tuesday-Thursday class, the exam is tomorrow, Thursday morning from 10 to 12. And if you are in my Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, or my Monday, Wednesday class, your exam is on Monday from 3 to 5 p.m., obviously. So the exam is going to be on everything that we haven't, you know, that wasn't on the last exam. So the last exam, Okay, so the last exam had like Paul Laurence Dunbar, Frederick Douglass, and everything before that. This exam will have William Carlos Williams, Mina Loy, H.D., T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, Langston Hughes, Gwendolyn Brooks, Audre Lorde, and Nevada, which is a lot. But I'm going to try and make it as like, you know, I'm not going to try and trick you. And it will also have terms from those lectures, so if you're taking notes on the stuff I say in these lectures, you should be fine, right? Like stream of consciousness, anticlimax, epiphany, for example. These could all be on the exam, right? Like they're terms that I mentioned and defined. You're definitely going to want to know like what modernism is. Probably want to know like what an ekphrastic poem is, what which is just a poem in conversation with a piece of art. What a manifesto is, which I talked about in the Mina Loy lecture. Probably want to know, well, I definitely want to know about the Harlem Renaissance. That's probably going to be on there. And the terms that I went over in the last lecture as well, so things like road novel, as well as all the sort of like gender studies terms I talked about, like heteronormativity, cisnormativity. You want to know that stuff. So all of that is like kind of just fair game for the short answer section. And what that's going to be is like I give you a definition and you give me the term I'm talking about. So for example, I don't know, if I were to say this literary and this, okay, I can't like make up questions on the spot, I'm sorry. Let me think about it for a second. If I were to say like this is, you know, this literary movement and also musical movement like took place in the 20s, centered in New York and Manhattan, and is still considered the most important literary movement, the most important African-American literary movement, you would answer that, the Harlem Renaissance. And I would probably word the question better, but I don't know, I'm not great at like on the fly definitions or questions or anything like that. Okay, so it's going to be, that will be the first section, and the section after that will be passage identification and explanation. So you tell me the author and the title, and then you explain to me why that passage is significant to the overall themes of the work. You need to address the passage specifically, and also like, yeah, you can Google this stuff, but you should still study, because I, in my last class that I had an exam for, I could still tell like who studied and who didn't. So obviously there's a lot of points you can get just by like, you know, cheating, which I don't care. Like, you know, I hope everybody gets an A this semester. It's been ridiculous. But you still need to study so that you understand like the meaning of the passages and the themes that like I want you to be thinking about, and that are there, and like why these books matter and these stories matter, because like it's going to take you a lot of time to like read, I don't know, like an analysis on every story while you're trying to take the exam. So make sure you are studying. Like, I promise you should study. You will do much better if you study. I'm not going to try to trick you, but at the same time, like, you know, save yourself some time. You only have 2 hours. It's going to be 30 possible points, which I think means there will be 4 times 6. So it'll be 6 of the short definition ones and 6 identify and explain. So it's longer than the last exam because you have 2 hours as opposed to just like one class period. So yeah, so you might want to remind me if you have accommodations that we have not already talked about via email. If you do have accommodations, you can just email me your exam when you're done with it by, you know, if you have double time, like email it to me by 4 hours after I send out the exam. If you have 1.5 times, like, then it will be an hour, like an extra hour. So just talk to me about that if you do have accommodations. For those of you who don't have accommodations, you're just going to be taking it, like I email it to you, you type it up in a Word document, you upload it to Turnitin before the time limit is over. And I'll give you like a few extra minutes on it, but you really, I mean, this is your final exam. Like I've been pretty lenient about everything this semester because it is like a crazy time, but like if you miss the exam, you missed the exam. So like don't miss the exam. And if you have extenuating circumstances, like you need to tell me. I really can't be like, you know, you can't miss the exam. So I don't know. I don't think that's a terrible policy to have. You just got to take it when you take it. Yeah. So anyway, it's been really lovely being your teacher this semester. I have really enjoyed teaching this class. It's my first time ever teaching it, and I feel like I had just a lot of great students, a lot of good discussions. Really wish we could have been in person longer, you know, but I hope these lectures were helpful, and I hope that you guys, above all, are like doing okay and staying safe and taking care of yourselves moving into the summer. So yeah, thanks for a great semester, and good luck on the exam. Let me know if you need anything.